Welcome to our ND Community Podcast. I'm Catherine and I'm a mother to 3 autistic ADHD daughters.
My name is Lorna and I'm a mother to an autistic son. We are going to be exploring stories and resources around lived ND experiences here in Guernsey. In this episode, we are speaking to Anna, who is a mum to neurodivergent twins. We are discussing specifically neurodivergent and particular gender identity in this episode.
It would be really good to start with looking at language around this because it can be really emotive. So it'd be really good to talk to you, Anna, about what language your trans son prefers and what you think the community as a whole prefer.
Hi, lovely to be here, thank you. Yes, my lovely son, he says he is a trans boy. He sometimes uses the expression trans mask to show that he wants to be masculine presenting, but he is also at times what's called gender fluid, because some days, in terms of what he's doing and the aesthetic that he's wanting to portray, he will want to be a little bit more femme, and other days he's very, very masc. He tried, like so many autistic kids do, really, really hard to cosplay at being a girl. And he bought lots of pink and sparkly things. He never wore them, but he bought them. And he had hair he could sit on and all those sorts of things to try and desperately try and be girl. But when he finally felt able to tell us that this was not making him happy, initially, he came out to us as non-binary, and this is quite common for trans kids to do. Non-binary is when you are saying, I'm not a boy and I'm not a girl. However, non-binary counts as part of the trans umbrella because everybody is basically either cis or trans, and these are Latin words. Cis means the same, trans means the other one, the opposite kind of thing. And so if your gender matches the gender that everybody else sees you to be in the gender that you were assigned at birth, then you are cis. Okay. If your internal gender identity, who you know you are, does not match the outside that everyone else perceives you to be, then you are trans. And so if you are saying you're non-binary, so you're saying I don't identify as a girl or a boy, I'm just me, that is still different to your assigned gender at birth. And so it still counts as trans. One of the other really important things that I think is good to know is that this is all about how you feel. And so there will be some people who look like very feminine girls, some people who look like very masculine boys, who actually identify as non-binary. And there are lots of people who are trans who don't feel safe to express themselves in the way that their gender identity would prefer. And so they are still a trans person, even if they don't actually feel safe to demonstrate that.
And I think the impact on that, on a person who doesn't feel safe in an environment that they feel confident expressing themselves and living honestly, their truth in, must be really damaging. Catherine, I think you have some stats there.
Yeah, I've been doing some research around just the challenges that this community may face.
So for every 10 non-autistic cisgender people who had at least one diagnosed physical health condition, there are 15 autistic cisgender people and 23 autistic trans people, which is a huge statistic.
It is. That's actually out of Cambridge University, January this year. And they also went on to say that the autistic people and trans people are at a much higher risk of suicide and suicide-related behaviours. So compared to non-autistic and cisgender, autistic cisgender individuals were 4.6 times more likely, and autistic trans people were 5.8 times more likely to report self-harm. That's huge.
It is absolutely devastating to hear those sorts of figures. There is one silver lining. Research that's been done by NHS Scotland identified that where a trans child is supported by their family and immediate community, those numbers drop dramatically. For example, 57% of the trans people identified by NHS Scotland who were not supported by their family had attempted suicide. 57%, but it was just 4% for the where a family was supportive of the child. 75% of unsupported trans kids suffer from depression. It goes down to just 23% for trans kids who are supported by their family. People who said that their mental health, on the other hand, was really good, it's up at 70% for supported trans kids, but it's just 15% for kids who've not been supported by their family. And that is why the most important thing that anybody can do is to support their child in exploring whatever element of their identity they want to. And it is the case that some children who have expressed a desire to be a different gender identity at a younger age, sometimes later on in life they change their mind and they return to their cisgender. But that's fine. We need to allow our children, particularly our neurodivergent children, to explore their identity and who they are apart from anything else, because by definition, our neurodivergent kids are going to be different from their neurotypical peers because of the way that their brain operates, because of the way in which they interact with this world. And it's so important that we are there to enable them to do that safely.
It's interesting you say that. There was a quote from Madge Woolard, who's an autistic pianist, and she says, I think there's a huge overlap with autistic people and transgender people. There are also a lot of non-binary autistic people around. I think this is because a lot of us don't really fit in socially, and this extends to areas around gender.
Yes, I very much see where she's coming from there. And I would say it more specifically that I remember my son as a very small child saying, I feel like I'm an alien from another planet. And going, oh my goodness, what does he mean? And then reading books about autism and realising that actually those specific words he said are really typical words for neurodivergent kids to say. And that feeling of difference from a very early age does result very often in neurodivergent kids needing to do a lot of self-reflection and exploring of who they are and why they... Because if you are the only alien and you are trying to work out who you are as that alien, you do need to develop really quite good skills in self-analysis, self-understanding, and exploring your identity. At the same time, alongside that, there is a lot of research that has shown that whereas neurotypical people in general, not always, but in general, neurotypical people value and prioritise their social network, the social hierarchy, and their place within their social world, and will tend to prioritise that over the truth. They would rather sweep something under the carpet and maintain the status quo, whereas in exactly the same situation, a neurodivergent person is actually more likely to prioritise, and to be fair, not necessarily the truth, but their perception of truth, of justice, of correctness over what their hierarchical society or social network would value. And because of that, an autistic person who doesn't feel that they fit in with their gender is more likely to go, well, I need to work out, look at this, I want to be correct, I want to be right, I want to work out what is me. Whereas a neurotypical person in the same place may feel that they value fitting in with the people around them more than they value being their authentic self.
It makes me very sad that we have a society that won't just accept how people want to be. You know, whether that they actually, there is this need to fit in, whether that's neurotypical or not, that we can't just accept people for who they are, really who they are, and allow them to express who they are.
And well, the interesting thing there, I think, is that that has, to a certain extent, improved recently, because one of the things is that autistic voices, since the 90s and the internet and being able to communicate with people across the world and find your tribe, that has enabled so many people to be who they want to be, to find other people who are like them, to build their own communities. And also, it is easier to find the vocabulary, because if you don't know words like trans, you don't know that it's possible to be trans. And so when you're feeling like that, you don't know that that's an option, for want of a better expression. And it's strange, because I think the way history has gone, and the fact that more and more children and young people are able to express and state publicly that their gender identity or their sexual orientation is not standard, that shows that, you know, that has changed. But also, if you go back hundreds and even thousands of years ago, when all of our lives were the other way, much smaller, where you were part of a small couple of hundred people village or tribe across the world, actually everybody knew everybody so well that everybody did accept each other, and roles were found for everybody. Literally going back, one of the things that fascinates me, 4,500 years ago in Sumeria, there are Sumerian records of a god. I think she was called Inanna, or they were called Inanna. And Inanna's priests were all trans, and Inanna, the god Inanna, had the ability to change people's gender.
Wow.
And so people exploring their gender and wanting to change it, we have records going back 4,500 years ago.
And those people in that society were celebrated?
Yes, it was very much. And within a lot of Native American communities, they have a concept called two-spirit. And this is something I don't know very much about. And because I'm not a Native American person, I don't feel able to really say anything about it. But the two-spirit people within Native American culture is very much valued and revered, particularly in terms of ceremonial and cultural activities. Well, the other thing we've got in places closer to home, there are archaeological digs that have happened across the UK where there has been found this burial ground and this skeleton surrounded by shields and swords, I think ones with several ships buried with them. You know, that has to be a really high-profile warrior. And that's what, you know, it's always been described as, you know, whatever area it was, man. They worked more recently. You know, there was recoverable DNA in some of the teeth or something. That warrior's a woman. And so although the grave goods and the clothing and things like that were found there were what would be expected in other situations from a male, that was a woman.
It's wonderful to hear the amount of research you've done. So for your son to know that he's absolutely perfect, just how he is.
Oh, yes.
Must be lovely. I mean, it's true acceptance, right? And to know there's a long history.
And I've also just realised I said that body was a woman. I don't know whether that body was a woman or a man. I should have said that body had female DNA. Because even when I try, really hard. It's so ingrained into us, into our language and stuff, that we divvy people up into male and female.
You touched then on, you felt you used the wrong term. I think there's a lot of fear out there about using the wrong term. What if we use the wrong term? How do you think the community would react?
My son says this really clearly. His granny, for example, really struggles to say the right pronouns, and because for 12 years ago, when referring to my children, she referred to them as the girls, she frequently still refers to them as the girls. But my son doesn't mind at all, because he knows that is simply muscle memory. Sometimes she doesn't even notice she's done it. When she does, she says, oh, I mean boy and girl. What's important is intention.
Okay. Yes. And respect.
And it's respect, because it's rude. Yeah. If somebody is called Josephine and have told you that they prefer to be called Joe, if you insist on calling them Josephine, that's just rude. And it's failing to, not that you're being rude, you're not taking into account their preferences. You don't need to understand trans. And I know the other thing is I probably should have said at the beginning and reiterated that I'm not trans, so I have no idea what it's like to be trans. Yeah. I'm pretty sure I'm neurodivergent, so that part of my children's lives I can identify with, I can understand. Where anything that relating to my son being trans, I do not know. I do not know what it's like. I do not know how he feels navigating the world as a trans boy, apart from what he tells me. But I also know that I don't need to understand. All I need to do is respect his needs and his boundaries, and we're all good.
Yeah.
So we have talked about research that we've read from Cambridge University, and Anna, you've brought up some research from Scotland as well around this issue. It seems to be one of the key messages that are, that seems to ring through from the research that you've both kind of brought to the table, is that support makes all the difference. So my question to you is, here in Guernsey, we're a small community, what kind of support were you and your son able to access?
Well, the first thing, I was lucky in as much as when I worked out that my children were autistic, my special interest became autism, and I followed lots of autistic advocates on Facebook and things like that to learn more. And because you are more likely to be trans if you are autistic, quite a lot of my feed came up with trans people or non-gender conforming people. And so I had the advantage that when my son one day came and he said, I don't know what you're going to think about this and I'm a bit scared to tell you, but, and he told me, and I knew that the correct response was to give him a huge big smile, say, thank you so much for trusting me to tell me this. What pronouns do you want now? Do you need a new name? And he looked at me absolutely gobsmacked and said, but it's not supposed to be this easy. And we went on to the baby name websites and looked at new names for him. And so when I was telling grandparents and friends and family and things like that about him, I made sure that it was very clear from the very first moment that this was a good thing. Because it's amazing how when you tell somebody something, their response and reaction to it is significantly affected by your reaction to start with.
So you're queuing it up.
Yes. And so I was like, this is really exciting, really brilliant news. I said, we've spent the last 12 years making a mistake. We thought we had 2 daughters. Turns out we were wrong. Not very observant of us. Actually, we've got a boy and a girl. Introducing them to you here now. Thank you very much. So I had the advantage of having found out about these things, not realising that it was anything to do with my family, but just kind of coming in through osmosis. But that very evening, the next thing I did was to contact Liberate in Guernsey on their Facebook page. Yeah. And I sent a message to their Facebook page saying, help, my son has just come out as trans. I want to do this right. Yeah. And Ellie from Liberate was fantastic. She immediately replied to me with links to particular websites and stuff like that where I could find out more information. And she offered an opportunity to speak to an autistic trans male adult in Guernsey to find out more from him. He was really good at giving me advice about how to support my son. In addition to that, they invited me to various of the groups that they run. And so I attended the Liberate's fantastic art club, which I started off going to because I wanted to learn more about this community that I didn't really know very much about, and stayed at because I met some brilliant friends and absolutely love it, and it's a really important part of my life.
Is this for the parents, or is this open to anyone in the process?
The Liberate Art Club is open to anybody over the age of 18. You don't have to be LGBTQIA, but it is a safe space, and I met some fantastic people there and learned a lot from them, and I'm very much appreciative to them for their support. Also, certainly at the time 2 years ago that this happened, when I spoke to school, the school was very supportive. Literally the next day, his name had been updated on the school system, so things like the school register came up with his new name, and all the paperwork to do with him, they changed his pronouns.
So can he now wear school uniform suitable for him?
Yes, literally the next day, go into school in boys' uniform.
And how did he find his peer group reacted?
His experience was really good in terms of that. Being autistic, being very sensory, he wasn't in a main classroom. He was in the hub. And so the number of children that he was engaging with was relatively small, and quite a lot of them were neurodivergent. And we've since, and quite a lot of them were gender diverse. So
it is a very accepting
community. It is a very accepting community that he was in. And I know of other children who are in the main standard classes who have generally had a pretty good experience. Having said that, that was the education policy at the time. The education policy now in Guernsey has been changed, and I think it is less good.
Okay, how has it changed?
The first thing is that we called up school and said, our son identifies as male now. And they went, right, okay, fine. I believe that now the policy is that the school will not change the gender identifiers in the way in which they engage with that child until they have a medical letter saying that it is in the child's best interests. And given the waiting list that CAMS, this can take a long time. And actually the fact that when my child had the bravery to tell me that then everything else happened relatively seamlessly was actually really valuable and important to him. The thought of him making that effort and telling me, and then it potentially being several months when he was living a life, for want of a better expression, at school would have been tricky. The other thing is that now if a child goes to anybody in school, a teacher or an LSA or whoever it may be, and says to that member of staff, I'm questioning my identity, that member of staff now is required to inform the parents. And that is something which could put that child into a very difficult position.
Yeah, sure.
And could result in children not reaching out for help in school.
And therefore mental health is massively impacted.
Absolutely.
There was a Trans Lives survey in 2021 called Enduring the UK's Hostile Environment, and it is UK based rather than Guernsey based, but it is, I think there was about 700 respondees to this survey, and they found that 14% were refused GP care on account of being trans on at least one occasion, and 70% impacted by transphobia when accessing general healthcare services. So if you're then asking children or asking schools not to change anything until they've got a medical letter, if that's also the case in Guernsey, then that becomes very difficult.
And there's potentially a financial barrier as well, because of the fact that our primary care isn't free.
Yeah.
And I don't know to what extent in reality the schools are operating according to this new policy which started in September. But it is also interesting that Jersey has recently changed their policy in this area, and Jersey has changed their policy to what ours used to be.
Oh, interesting. There used to be more like ours now?
Yes.
So, and they've gone the other way?
Jersey and Guernsey have switched and swapped. So that is something that I find concerning for future kids, that uncertainty. From the perspective of me and other parents whose children have already made that change, the new policy says that any existing accommodations for any children will continue. However, there are already issues with the fact that the majority of trans kids in Guernsey schools do not feel safe going to the loo in the school, and therefore are deliberately not eating or drinking at school, and that is impacting on their physical health.
Yeah.
And it's also concerning that the new anti-discrimination rules in Guernsey come into force in September coming, but gender identity is not one of the protected items. Your sexual orientation is, but your gender identity isn't.
And if you've got, in this same survey I was just talking about, 52% of the people who responded are self-identified as neurodiverse. And if you've got, assuming the same percentage carries across the population, then actually those kids put in those situations may also struggle to identify how they're feeling, how to communicate that. So again, it just all impacts and impacts and impacts.
And this is why non-gender conforming neurodivergent kids, as you said at the beginning, are at higher risk of physical and mental ill health, which then doesn't get picked up because, as you've said, the barriers to healthcare, and I have anecdotally heard from parents of trans kids and from trans adults in Guernsey who have experienced that, and people who have had to change GP to try and find one that was gender affirming. It's really, really worrying. There's also the general population view and the education of everybody within Guernsey in understanding difference, be that neurodiversity, gender diversity, or anything else, isn't great. And it results in a larger number of people who have not been exposed to the realities of these things and operates their life based on assumptions and preconceptions. There have been recently some quite worrying articles in the Guernsey press that were promoting anti-trans ideology and viewpoints, which were using known discredited data and outdated information. And our deputies in the States themselves are incredibly ill-informed when they're making the decisions. Some of the debates that went on during the Discrimination Act a couple of years back, some of the commentary in those debates was horrendous. And it was clearly people waxing lyrical about something that they actually knew very little reality about, and people talking about, for example, trans people who had clearly never spoken a word to a trans person in their life. And I know that Liberate offer to invite deputies and such like to come to various of their group sessions and stuff and meet people to learn about the lived experience of these people. And it's not very often taken up. And I'm very aware that as a mum to somebody who's still a kid at the moment, I'm able to protect him from a lot. Yeah. But the adult gender non-conforming people who I know in Guernsey say that they frequently don't feel safe in Guernsey.
I'm guessing they don't feel represented either.
No, indeed. We can't represent everybody fully at all times, but yes, there is a lot that could be done to make our island safer for trans people, safer for neurodivergent people. The issue about the number of neurodivergent kids who, despite really dedicated staff, are being failed in our schools is a whole other podcast. But yeah, it is worrying. I do worry about my child's safety in the future going forwards.
Was there anything in particular that your son maybe wanted us to know about what it's like being trans and ND?
Well, the first thing he said was, "Mum, you don't know anything about what it's like to be trans," which is why I'm. And when I'm trying to understand things with him, I also try to put analogies in place to help me. And so I'm left-handed, and my grandfather was left-handed, and he had his hand tied behind his back to force him to write in a right-handed manner. And he spent his whole life not writing comfortably. And I don't want my son to spend his whole life not existing comfortably. But the other thing he said is, "Mum, it's really not a big deal. I wasn't happy. I told you I was trans. I am now being a boy, and now I'm happy."
But he's
So
got a
that's
really
okay.
supportive family. And
Oh,
I
yes.
wonder if you've got somebody in his shoes without that supportive family background, what they would want to sort of know.
He has kids that he is friends with who are not able to openly say that they are trans, and they're only living half their life. And it's that sense of kind of almost looking over their shoulder all the time, being aware of who's around them when they're talking to each other, should the wrong person hear something. And that is no way for a kid to live.
It's horrendous, actually, isn't it? Their stress levels must be through the roof.
Yeah. And add to that being neurodivergent and everything else. And I am so proud of my son. I am so in awe of the mental mountain that he climbs every day just to be. He's brilliant. Yeah. Love him to bits.
Absolutely.
Anna, is there anything else you'd like to talk about?
One final elephant in the room to throw out there is J.K. Rowling.
Oh, wow. Yeah, okay.
I had two children who adored the Harry Potter books.
I remember you telling me, Anna, that they could recite like pages and pages of Harry Potter. I remember that really clearly.
It was a huge special interest for both children. Suddenly, somebody who had created such an important part of their life, they were now aware was being mean to people like my son. And also a series of books in a world that on the surface appears to be so inclusive and championing the kids that are different. It then has become, within the trans community, a really difficult topic because so many trans people say that they survived their teenage years by reading Harry Potter and identifying with the being different.
So what would you say to people who would say, but she's entitled to her opinion, Anna? I mean, you've got your opinion, you've got your truth, you've got your life. Is she not entitled to her own opinion and her own kind of views on these things? What would you say?
She isn't. She's totally entitled to her own opinion, but she has such a very large voice that anybody with that large voice has a duty is not the quite word, but it kind of has a responsibility to operate in a calm and measured manner, for want of a better expression. And I am perfectly happy for anybody to be anti-trans, but the question is, what are you being anti to? And she and other anti-trans lobbyists focus on bathrooms. I have actually been attacked in a workwoman's bathroom. Newsflash, it wasn't by a man or a trans woman, it was by a cisgender woman. That picture of a woman on the front of the bathroom door does not have a magic force field around it that prevents men going in. And how many of my female friends have got annoyed by the queue for the ladies' loos in all sorts of places and nipped into the men's perfectly happily? It is a dog whistle side issue, and it's nothing actually to do with trans women. Trans women get blamed and get put out as the whipping boy for all sorts of things where actually that's not the problem. And actually, as a section of society, trans women are the section of the population who are at highest risk of being the victim of violent assault. They are the most marginalised group in society.
Anna, thanks so much for coming to talk to us today. It's a huge area of conversation, and we are really grateful that you were able to come talk to us about your experiences.
That's an absolute pleasure. It's really nice to be able to share my experience and what I have researched and learned. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Anna. Thank you.
Thanks.
If there are people out there who are listening and either have similar experience, or if there's any success stories as well, so please by all means get in touch. We'd love to hear from you.
Just a quick shout out to EasyDo. Without EasyDo, we wouldn't be able to do this podcast. They've lent us all their tech. We're really grateful.
Thank you.